Hey everyone, welcome to the Smart Economy Podcast, a production of neonewstoday.com. I'm your host, Dylan Grabowski. In this episode of the Smart Economy Podcast, I sat down and spoke with Pavel Sinelnikov, the developer relations lead at ZKM, a ZKVM-based universal settlement network. In this episode, we spoke about lessons learned in Ethereum's growth and applying them to Bitcoin, the different types of L2 rollups, the ethos of decentralization and how ZKM applies that to its sequencer network, sustainable Bitcoin yields, and so much more. Just a reminder, nothing said on this podcast is a solicitation to buy or sell any tokens, and that nothing should be taken as financial advice. The host or guest may hold tokens discussed in any given episode, and you can head over to neonewstoday.com to view a disclaimer. With all that said, I really enjoyed this conversation with Pavel, and I hope you enjoy it too. Hey everyone, welcome to the Smart Economy Podcast. Today we're joined by Pavel Sinelnikov, the developer relations lead at ZKM, a ZKVM-based universal settlement network. How you doing today, Pavel?
I'm doing pretty good. Just woke up, had some tea. But yeah, excited to get into it.
Yeah, in doing my research for ZKM, there were a lot of fascinating threads that I'm definitely looking forward to pulling on, but I think for our listeners who maybe have been listening to me for the better half of the past quarter, I've been sort of getting a little excited about Bitcoin L2s. So I guess to jump into the conversation, at a very high level, how can zero-knowledge technology being propagated by ZKM help to enhance the broader Bitcoin ecosystem?
Absolutely. I guess so that's a big question. So I'll start with just the high level and then try to go down. So Bitcoin, where we see is a store of value. There's a lot of utility as a form of essentially you have you have Bitcoin in the sense that you want to hold it and you want to essentially potentially just do other things and come back to it, and it's still there. And where we are, let's say in the Ethereum ecosystem, there's a lot of let's say DeFi stuff. There's a lot of like things where people are just going and creating like DEXs and swaps, and there's perps and all these other like financial products, where we see how that these two systems are, let's say, not independent of each other, but they're sort of they help, let's say, grow the entire let's say crypto ecosystem. So where we see essentially the growth of both ecosystems is we can essentially expand the utility of Bitcoin with I know one implementation was like the Lightning Network, where payments essentially have been prioritized as the main use case, and we see that there can be other things using the Bitcoin security, using the decentralization of Bitcoin, being used for other things than payments, but still retaining the same level of security that the Bitcoin's proof of work network provides. So that's kind of the idea of where we see that value is that Ethereum provides a lot of that dApp integrations and all of this. And even though Bitcoin doesn't have a virtual machine, that doesn't mean that it should be limited to just payments and a sort of value. There can be other opportunities, but still native to Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. So are we like entering a paradigm where both proof of work and proof of stake networks are kind of very valuable to the broader blockchain ecosystem, and maybe we need to have support for all these different financial derivatives operating on top of both to provide a more like resilient blockchain enabled economy?
I think that each system has its that they have the priorities, and with this the store of value that Bitcoin provides, the essentially the dApps that Ethereum has, and then the utility of potentially bridging that gap between using that store of value to potentially grow it into something where we can have additional financial assets like derivatives, but still be native to Bitcoin. So you don't need to go in and have the benefits of financial products on other ecosystems. You can do it in that same form of ecosystem, utilizing this the security of Bitcoin. So that's I guess the like native integrations as well. So you don't need to go different wallets or provider. It's essentially trying to create a system where you can still let's say benefit from the utility of both. That you don't have to pick and choose.
Cool. Yeah, I love how ZKM really focuses on providing this like additional functionality for Bitcoin while the end user still maintains ownership over the asset. So I can't wait to like dive into that a little bit later. But I kind of want to like take a few steps back and hear about like your genesis into the blockchain space. Like, how did you end up here? And usually I like to hear like a part of like a two-part response. First, when was the first time you heard about crypto and Bitcoin? And if you're anything like me, you heard about it and you're just like, oh, cool. And then ignored it for a few years. And so when was like the first time you heard about cryptocurrencies? And then secondarily, like what was your aha moment? When was it like that it clicked for you and you're thinking to yourself, oh, this is something. This is a place I want to be.
Yeah. Well, the first time that I heard about Bitcoin was essentially talking to, I saw it on the internet somewhere, just randomly. I talked to my dad, and my dad's like, no, that's a scam. Don't do it. Don't do it, man. And I'm like, all right, okay. And so, but then, everything was, I guess a lot of things happened in later on. So I think I joined, I would say like the educational component for crypto in 2017. So that's when I actually was doing my full-time role, as in like I was part of an incubator for blockchain-based projects. And then we're essentially, the main thing is like, okay, how do we find utility within these decentralized ecosystems? And so that really progressed into a lot of the like I did lectures for DeFi, for the Royal Bank of Canada, and essentially educating them on like yield farming and just tokens in general, which is really also interesting how the other traditional financial institutions are interested in seeing like how these other like non-traditional systems work as well. So I would say that's sort of the entry point, and then from there I worked for Metis and essentially doing developer relations as well as like ambassador coordination for them, and essentially building up the technical repertoire and taking it like sort of one step further, and like, all right, this is possible, but then what about this next thing? And then always on the bleeding edge of the tech stack, and that's how I got here to ZKM. Essentially, just really interested in seeing how these little pieces work, and then potentially taking these systems and applying it to what was previously thought to be not possible. Essentially, the connections of different blockchains and then the interoperability of everything.
So I think it's like really fascinating that you came into the space as from like an educational perspective in 2017, and you were kind of out there, boots on the ground, educating financial institutions or folks who worked in these financial institutions, maybe at like meetups or when they would come to like university events. So I guess from your experience, you're 7 years in now as an educator in this space. How has like the level of questions or the level of technological expertise kind of improved or maybe devolved over time? What are just kind of like your general insights from the events that you've been doing, educating folks? How has that changed over the past 7 years?
Yeah. Like that's a great question in terms of the questions did say progress in terms of it's kind of like the first questions were just like, how can we use this? And then it's like, what is the value of this system? And then when people are like, okay, well, I can use this to do more than just buy and then hold. I can use this for other types of or like just for transaction processing. I can use this to potentially build other systems off of it. And then it's like, okay, well, whoa, then like the whole like layer two craze happened, and then everyone's now building all these systems that build really on top of each other. And then the kind of before it was like, what can I use this for? And now it's like, what can't I use this for? Kind of. And a lot of what we're doing even is taking our core infrastructure and technology and then seeing where it can fit into these incomplete parts, where it's like, or isolated parts, and seeing if there's a way to merge it and solve these difficult problems, but using like one cohesive tech stack where you don't need to learn like another language in order to do like let's say verification of different computation. And especially when you have like consensus structures implemented, like proof of work, proof of stake, you don't want to layer additional let's say blockchains on top of other blockchains, which then reduces security, reduces decentralization. You don't know who's in control. You want to instead have systems where you can verify that certain parts of the consensus, well, not certain, but the consensus was achieved on this blockchain, and as a result, I can do things on another blockchain. And you want ultimate guarantees for that. You don't want to have like reduced security as a result of this. So I think molding these things into statements where we can find these let's say solutions where the most benefit is seen from. So in this case, like ultimate security and essentially still maintaining that decentralization is key. We don't want to take systems and just create another bank at the end of it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up, you mentioned earlier there was an L2 craze, and you're just kind of talking right now about the underlying security that an L1 like Bitcoin or Ethereum offers. So I guess I'm curious, like, is ZKM like a true L2? When I think of like Base, there needs to be like a centralized entity like Coinbase that is batching the transactions and then using its own sequencer and sending them to settle on Ethereum. So would we say that ZKM is like an L2, or is it like an L1.5, 1.75? How do you kind of like wrap up this kind of philosophy that you just spoke about and relate it to the way that ZKM is interacting with these L1s like Bitcoin and ETH?
Absolutely. Yeah. So what defines decentralization? What defines security? So there's different types of L2s that are present. So some of them are let's say rollups, others are state channels, others are side chains. So there's well, they're in their own category of, let's say, scaling solutions. So they're not necessarily considered like most of them are just the like there's a specific use case for this. So for example, like the Lightning Network, you have essentially the ability to transfer assets and have like very fast transaction confirmation times. But there's some aspects of centralization that does occur. So there's a let's say I think a 202 multi-sig, and then there's but it can potentially support millions of essentially transactions per second. So there's like definite benefits for using this for payments. In terms of a rollup, so what a rollup would accomplish is you can essentially take different you can have a you have the ability to have smart contracts on there. So with the leveraging like existing let's say financial instruments that are present on Ethereum, and then but still offer that same benefit of transactions per second being in the millions. And what do we also mean by the let's say is it true L2? This means that where are the transactions inevitably posted, and how can transactions, if they're not, let's say they're not finalized, how can they be challenged? And in our case, we have a system where we implement a challenge process in case there is any form of disagreements where the transactions that were posted, like a commitment was posted on Bitcoin. If there's any difference from the actual transactions that have occurred, essentially one user out of potentially any amount of nodes that are essentially running can essentially challenge it. So in this case, you have the ability. You only need one honest user in order to come in and make that challenge and to secure the entire network. And that's like more of like the optimistic style of the verification. In addition, so you mentioned Base, and they have a single sequencer. So I don't know if you know about Metis. So one of the things that Metis did is that they're the first layer 2 that decentralized the sequencer. So this means that there's no one single point of failure in terms of who would post the let's say the batch of transactions to Bitcoin, or sorry, to Ethereum, but in this case to Bitcoin. So we've actually taken that core process of the decentralized sequencer and applied it to this system as well. So essentially, there's no single point of failure, and in order to secure the entire network, only one node needs to come in and actually say something if let's say some fraud is detected from the sequencer who posted that batch. And in this case, that sequencer's stake would get slashed, and there's other let's say economic guarantees for this system. And in terms of just the comparisons, I think that having that decentralized sequencer is very important, especially to maintain that the same philosophy of decentralization within the blockchain ecosystems. We don't want to rely on a single entity in order to facilitate transfers, because then that's just an exchange, that's just another bank. So we want to make sure that these processes are fully decentralized from that perspective.
Cool. I definitely want to dig into the trade-offs between centralized, decentralized, shared sequencers in a bit. But just kind of just to help folks who are listening to this, because our audience isn't always like necessarily like crypto natives. Sometimes we have some folks who stumble on the podcast because they're new to blockchain and crypto in general. So maybe hearing someone works in DevRel is a brand new job they've never heard of before. So could you just like maybe really quickly just explain what your job as in developer relations is, and maybe kind of based off of the experience you've been able to accumulate, can you share some of your insights into what you think makes a good DevRel team?
Yeah, absolutely. So DevRel, I would say, is a category of marketing, but specifically to developers. What we are trying to do, so I'm in that sphere. What me and my team are doing is essentially taking the different aspects of the program and explaining it in a way where developers can easily just grasp the concepts and start developing on top of this infrastructure. So I mentioned before how there is, let's say, a lot of potential use cases that can arise from, let's say, creating a system where based in ZK, where it is provably correct. So any computation that is executed is essentially guaranteed correct, even on machines that are untrusted, because the actual program that was run correctly, and as a result, the answer to that is correct. So in this case, taking that, let's say, complex idea and then breaking it down to, okay, what can we build with these systems that can provide a good level of usefulness to the space? So things like what we're looking into specifically is trying to solve the problem of trustless cross-chain transactions to prove essentially a transaction that happened on one blockchain that was finalized, settled, can then be relayed to another blockchain. So essentially you can use a single communication mechanism completely in an untrusted way, and then send messages across different blockchains using these ZK proofs as a result. So I know I sort of detracted from that original question, but to give a short answer, it's explaining these complex technical topics in a way that developers can understand, and in the future build out some of the tools and some of the ideas that would be, let's say, very useful to have as a system of essentially getting a lot of essentially value from. So the cross-chain bridging, for example, that we already see, like globalization, for example, has made things much more accessible in terms of economies. So I think of it as the globalization of leveraging many different economies, many different blockchains, and connecting them together in a form where you're no longer in just one ecosystem, can only do one thing, and then that's it. You're locked off from everyone else. I think that the future is more interconnected. So hopefully I answered that question.
No, yeah, you did a great job. And I guess maybe in like 2 years ago, if we were talking cross-chain transactions, we'd be talking mostly about EVM networks. But with the advent of like ordinals and runes and BitVM, we're starting to see a lot more of this experimentation that we've seen in EVM land kind of land in Bitcoin land. So when you're going out and you're talking to all these developers and you're trying to on-ramp new folks into the ecosystem, the ZKM ecosystem, to build, maybe even to hire some developers, what's like the level of interest that you're seeing from folk? Can you assign like a certain proportion to these are X Bitcoin builders and these are Y Ethereum builders that want to come work with us? Or are you not really seeing like an overlap like that? You're just kind of seeing people who are hungry to really work at providing this like globalization you were talking about and just connecting longstanding L1s in general.
Yeah. So in terms of the interest, so it definitely one of the key parts to this is understanding, let's say, the needs of a blockchain, and to actually go a bit deeper, it's to the community. What does the community look for in what they are trying to see as valuable? So, if I'm, team Bitcoin, or I'm team Ethereum or Cardano or Tron or Phantom. So there's like all of these blockchains that exist, and there's people that have their own, let's say, vision on how this blockchain can be used to fulfill, let's say, to solve a overarching problem. So, or just provide value in general. So what we really connected with at conferences, for example, is that Bitcoin holders are looking for essentially a way that their capital is secured, that it's essentially like it cannot be altered, let's say, by a third party or restricted by a third party. And then another aspect that we found is yield. So the ability to essentially grow that capital that was put into Bitcoin and then into other ways, specifically sustainable yield. People hold on to Bitcoin because it's a store of value, and so we want to see if that store of value can also be applied in other cases. So if gold, for example, is an asset that people hold because it's that store of value, if there's a way to essentially to grow that gold into potentially like to lend it out, or to have ways that you can still use your capital effectively, and then still have it essentially work on your behalf in that way. So I think that those two degrees is something that we've gotten from speaking to people at these Bitcoin conferences. But of course, people have different perspectives as well on all of this, on each and every blockchain, for example. So I would say Ethereum and the developers there are more into the, all right, well, how do we build more layers on top of layers, and they're interested more in like that tech side of like DeFi and these things. So that idea of how can we have sustainable yield while also providing essentially the secure solutions that were created in other ecosystems, and then apply them to essentially grow Bitcoin into let's say more lucrative opportunities for that capital. Sorry.
Yeah. I want to dig into this a little bit more. Like, what is sustainable yield? Because when I think of something that's unsustainable, I think of Anchor Protocol that was built on top of Luna, where they guaranteed 20% interest and nobody really knew where it was coming from or how long it was going to go. It was more like a trust us, bro. You're going to find this here. And you're right. The Bitcoin community is proud of hodling their underlying assets. The majority of folks who are diehard Bitcoin believers think that this is a digital store of value. This is digital gold. Potentially, Bitcoin will even become the ultimate settlement network, and that Bitcoin might even become the world's reserve currency. I'm not here to say that will or will not happen, but these are the type of believers that are holding these assets, and they really don't want to let go of their Bitcoin. They've been burnt in the past by lending on Celsius or lending on BlockFi. They had to send their Bitcoin to a trusted centralized entity. And both of those companies I just mentioned failed spectacularly. And really, there's a few kind of like native solutions out there, like Thorchain, I'm thinking of with its vaults and its lending that kind of allow users to hodl their Bitcoin. But even with Thorchain's earn program, you still have to send your Bitcoin to a smart contract. And that smart contract holds that Bitcoin on behalf of your wallet. So where does ZKM kind of like fit into this? How are you guys providing sustainable yields while also allowing Bitcoin holders to kind of maintain ownership over the underlying Bitcoin asset?
Very good question. So one of the main, I would say the main value propositions is that decentralized sequencer. So we've seen with Ethereum, for example, we have those nodes that allow for you to take Ethereum and essentially leverage it as to essentially validate transactions on Ethereum itself. So there are different types of protocols on Ethereum, like Lido and Rocket Pool, that enable you to take essentially a portion of ETH that you hold, and you can allocate that to these providers, which then would run nodes, and then these nodes would be validating transactions on Ethereum, and then thereby giving you a return in terms of the amount that is allocated. So we see that a similar process can be done with the decentralized sequencers in a way where you could take that capital and essentially for a average user, maybe running a sequencer isn't let's say it's a bit too high of an economic. It's a big investment, so you only have like a certain amount. You can take that and essentially grow. You could essentially pool the funds together and use that as part of the sequencer's stake in that, and the provider would then supply the service of actually posting transactions on the Bitcoin network, and as a result, that the pooled assets together would be securing the transactions that are on in this way on the network, essentially. So and that transactions, a portion of that would go to the people that supply those that Bitcoin for the service of securing the L2. So that's primarily how the system works, where we just essentially take that and we can take those assets, use it to secure the network. But we can also take those assets, essentially the staked Bitcoin, and we can essentially use that to restake it into other places. So the similar concept of you taking Lido and you have STETH, and that STETH can be used in other DeFi protocols. So you still have that asset in Bitcoin, but you are earning yield off of the Bitcoin that you have staked for that provider, so that sequencer, but you can still use that Bitcoin that you received, the ST Bitcoin, and you can use it within the protocol. And in that way, there can be other opportunities for that Bitcoin. So you're earning yield on the Bitcoin that you're still holding. And then as a result, you can take that and potentially put it into a DEX or a lending protocol like Aave, and essentially earn value on top of the Bitcoin that you have staked. And so in this way, you're essentially earning more off of the assets that you are earning a yield on the assets that you currently have. And then you can use those assets for other activities. And there has been developments with Eigenlayer, for example, as restaking. So you can take essentially that's the staked Bitcoin that you have, and you can use it to restake and provide security for other protocols. Or essentially, there's the ability to take assets and apply it into let's say different areas. Now, of course, there's some risk with providing that because you're essentially using Bitcoin as a means to have economic security for certain protocols. But then that is up to the user to determine what is in the let's say the risk of what the user is. But we've seen that, for example, Eigenlayer has very low risk but sustainable returns. And so that's of course what we want to focus on and prioritize, is that sustainable yield for providing essentially a service where people still can retain the capital and the rewards for essentially holding and providing that's the utility of economic security for other protocols. And there's different markets for that. It's kind of like if insurance is kind of like the overall, like imagine insurance, you're putting it into a pool, and the potential risk that something happens can be quite low for some insurance policies and quite high for others. But we want to prioritize on the low and sustainable, and make sure that the assets, for example, do not have a significant risk in essentially having anything happen, and that you still have those assets that you can then use freely within the ecosystem, and still can exchange it for other liquid assets.
Got it. So you can use your staked BTC for lending and borrowing protocols. But you also mentioned at the beginning of kind of like the sustainable yield model that I take my Bitcoin and then I put it into staked Bitcoin. And you mentioned that there's kind of like an underlying yield before I use staked Bitcoin for like Aave like sort of lending protocols. So where's the kind of like first level of Bitcoin yield come from? Is the decentralized sequencer that I stake my Bitcoin to, is this also like competing to mine Bitcoin blocks, and each block that it wins, that Bitcoin that's won is distributed to the staked Bitcoin holders? Or am I kind of making something up that's not there?
So there isn't a proof of work aspect. So the sequencers are not mining the block. They are posting the let's say a state commitment to Bitcoin itself. So because there is a state commitment to Bitcoin, the sequencer is essentially saying that these transactions that are included within this state commitment is correct, and they're the ones posting that state commitment. And essentially, without going into too much detail, it's that stake commitment that is secured by the Bitcoin network or the Bitcoin blockchain, which then makes it so that anybody can challenge what the sequencer has posted, and because it was already posted on Bitcoin and then included as one of the blocks or one of the transactions in one of the blocks, then someone can challenge that transaction or that stake commitment that was posted, and as a result, slash the sequencer. But essentially, where does the yield come from? It comes from the fees that are paid out to the sequencer in order to post that transaction to the Bitcoin network. And so the sequencer does take minor fees to include those Bitcoin transactions in a batch, and then part of that fee is paid to them to actually post that transaction, and part of that fee is paid out to the sequencer directly. Now, when you do in this case, when you're doing the staked Bitcoin, you can essentially get yield from providing your share of essentially Bitcoin for that sequencer. So that sequencer will then do a revenue share split from the revenue that it takes in from the transactions that it uses to post to L1. And so because the sequencer is decentralized, there can be I think there might be an upper limit to how many sequencers there can be, but essentially people can start up their own sequencer nodes and essentially pool capital together to then be able to provide that service of processing transactions on the network, and then those transactions each essentially have that fee of that's the transaction fee, and that transaction fee, it essentially gets split up across all let's say stakers that provided that liquidity or economic stake. Hopefully that makes sense where the yield comes from. So it's not like the Terra Luna anchor where it's just we're printing money, but where does the money come from? Or where it's BlockFi or Celsius, where it's like, give us your money, but I'm not going to tell you what I use it for. So hopefully that is a bit more of a transparent process in the actual execution of it, that you're essentially using your capital. And the goal is to use any amounts of Bitcoin that anybody can provide, but then they're using it to secure, let's say, the entire Rollup network. So you're not limited to having 200 Bitcoin to essentially secure the network. You can have 0.001, and you can still earn yield off of that for providing that stake.
So I'm almost there. I think I understand it. And so based off of what you were saying, if I'm like consuming what you said correctly, basically it's the folks who want to challenge the previous transactions that were essentially posted to Bitcoin state through the decentralized sequencer network. It's every time that challenge is made, there's a fee paid, and then that fee is distributed.
Oh, not every time. Anybody can make a challenge, but in order to make a challenge, there is a fee associated with that. But that fee is let's say not relevant in the majority of cases. So the actual fees that come from let's say executing the transaction. So in a regular case, so let's say no fraud occurs, nothing occurs. We're processing thousands of transactions a second, and in each transaction has a small fee associated with it, and that fee essentially goes to the sequencer, and just regular transactions, the transaction fee goes to the sequencer, and then the sequencer essentially takes part of that fee to post the stake commitment to the Bitcoin blockchain, and then the remaining amount of fee goes to the sequencer. But in the case of the restaking, in the case of the staking, it goes and it gets evenly distributed across all of the people that have essentially provided that stake for that sequencer.
Got it. And can you just help me figure out who's paying the fee in this instance?
So the users are paying the fee when they make transactions on this layer 2 network.
Okay, so the user of the L2 is paying the fee, but when I'm staking my Bitcoin, I'm basically like securing the decentralized sequencers. So me as the staker, I don't have to really do anything. It's as activity grows on the ZKM L2, then the yield will increase and it will also decrease as activity decreases.
That's correct. Exactly. And yeah, essentially that's where that yield would come from. And the important part to note is that you still retain that derivative of staked Bitcoin, which then can be used within the ecosystem for lending protocols or decentralized exchanges or ordinals and the like. So you can still use that capital that you have, but it's generating essentially passive income for the amount of staked Bitcoin that you have.
Perfect. And the staked Bitcoin, are the users, the stakers, are they receiving STBTC or native Bitcoin as their yield?
So I'm not quite sure about the exact amount, but they are receiving, let's say it can be exchanged for native Bitcoin. So I believe that in the same way that lending out on Aave where you would essentially receive a derivative token, I think like AUSDT, for example, that you would still be able to redeem it 1-to-1 with USDT. So I think like the staked Bitcoin that you would receive can be redeemed for 1-to-1 with the actual native Bitcoin. So when you're making a withdrawal, let's say you do not want to provide that stake anymore, then one is that you can actually just exchange it on a decentralized exchange. And then there might be like a bit of slippage for that, or you can redeem it for 1-to-1 that value of staked Bitcoin. So if you have one staked Bitcoin, you would be able to redeem it for one native Bitcoin.
Cool. Thanks for spending a little more time on me with me to understand it. I think that's super fascinating. So like one of the things that I think the most long-term threat to the Bitcoin network as an L1 is the ability to continue paying miners in a way that's sustainable in the future, especially as the subsidy continues to decrease each year. So is ZKM like a part of the solution to settling on Bitcoin as an L1 and providing these fees to help subsidize the miners and the node operators because there are transaction fees? And so is like ZKM a part of this broader solution? And I know that it's not just one project that is going to provide all the fees for Bitcoin miners and node validators to kind of like feed themselves in the future. There's probably going to have to be hundreds of uses for L2s and other like NFT projects like ordinals that settle on Bitcoin. But yeah, do you guys see yourself as like a part of the long-term solution for Bitcoin's security?
Yeah. So the way that we work, the way that like L2s deploying on Bitcoin is we generate transactions that would then be settled on Bitcoin. So those transactions, albeit if it's just us, it'd be very minimal, but they're still producing a let's say the benefit to Bitcoin in the form of in order for the L2 to operate, there still needs to be those transactions that get applied on Bitcoin. So that is basically the guarantee. So in order for our protocol, the L2 to function, we would need to make those transactions. So if those fees, let's say like by miners, when let's say the Bitcoin supply, when it essentially goes to zero, that can be actually issued, and we go into an entirely fee-based model, there is still going to be demand from our side in order to pay the miners to process those transactions. So I think that even people moving to L2s, that miners are still getting rewarded for for them investing tons of compute power into essentially mining these blocks. So we will always have that demand for transactions. And so in this case, like if the supply goes down and let's say goes to zero, but let's say the fees then go up as a result, and maybe people that are transacting just on Bitcoin itself, it becomes way too expensive for them to justify posting on L1. We would still be guaranteed to keep posting transactions on L1 because that's how we function. But as a result, people might move to us as a form to pay less transaction fees as a result. And so, that essentially, when transaction costs would go up for the L1, it might not be profitable for most users, but it would be still profitable for us, assuming that the demand also takes off for our L2 and more people are processing transactions on that. So hopefully that answers the question of sustainability over the long term. So even though like some users will not be able to use Bitcoin directly, but they are still inheriting Bitcoin security, let's say through these L2s. And then of course there's more research in the space. There's potentially better ways that can exist for essentially proving transactions. And we're looking into that right now on our research arm on like how can we fully use ZK proofs to essentially without the need for let's say to make transactions directly, let's say from Bitcoin to Ethereum or Ethereum to Bitcoin. But of course, that would require right now, as far as we know, that requires still interoperability solutions and some trade-offs that occur within those solutions as well.
Yeah, very cool. Thanks for helping to dig further into how ZKM is a part of Bitcoin's longer-term solution for security. We are kind of like getting closer to the end of the hour, but I do want to talk about sequencers really quickly. And I understand why ZKM might want to lean in to a decentralized sequencer network, particularly because decentralization is at the core ethos of the Bitcoin network. But I want to hear from your perspective, why is ZKM focusing on a decentralized mechanism as opposed to a centralized or a shared sequencer network? And maybe as you're providing your answer, you could also touch on some of the trade-offs that each of the three different type of sequencer networks offer, and maybe like the pros and cons to ZKM's decentralized solution.
Absolutely. So there are, let's say, many different types of pathways for sequencing transactions. So currently, how it works today is for most L2s is that there's a single sequencer, and that single sequencer is responsible for posting transactions to layer one. Now, there's problems when it comes with how is MEV handled. So MEV is maximum extractable value, and that's essentially front running. So when a person does a swap, you can essentially post a transaction, and then let's say that transaction will buy X amount of Ethereum or something, and then the person sees that in the mempool, and then they see, oh, they're buying X amount. So then in this case, I want to essentially buy it before, and then sell it to them in that transaction. So essentially, I can essentially sell them this amount of Ether for a discounted price because I know what the trade is going to be. And then as a result, the sequencer potentially can extract that value from the person who has posted it by reordering the transactions. So there's different types of, let's say, philosophies. Some of them are like, we can take this revenue, let's say, if the sequencer decides to do, let's say, this ordering of transactions, we can take this revenue and we can apply it into like public goods. So that's what optimism is doing. So others are saying, no, we're not going to reorder, we're not going to do anything. But of course, there can't really be a guarantee of that, because since there's a single sequencer, it's a single point of failure. So if they start doing it, there's really no other option to use a different system. So shared sequencing is when you use one sequencer for multiple different network, or one single sequencer potentially network. So with Metis, actually, so they've taken decentralized sequencers. So they essentially created a proof of stake network, but it's for the sequencers themselves. So it's not secured by proof of stake, but it's essentially how sequencer rotation is handled. So it's not the actual consensus, it's not the actual finalization. It's just who gets to process these transactions in let's say epochs. So you get to process from transaction 1 to transaction 100. So that's sequencer 1. From transaction 100 to transaction 200, this is sequencer 2, and so on and so forth. So that's this also has the benefit of instead of having a let's say if a sequencer behaves maliciously in terms of MEV extraction, they can actually be booted off the network if that, if they go into that side of things. In addition, as we've seen with Linea, they experienced a hack on the network, and as a result, Linea shut down their sequencer for that reason, to prevent the attacker from withdrawing funds. In this case, if they can prevent this transaction, or let's say like this amount of transactions from leaving the network, they can do it for any transactions. So kind of like if you have the power to stop the blockchain, then what's the point of a blockchain? So in that way, there might be systems such as Espresso that have like these for example, shared sequencers, but we don't really know what the true end goal of these systems are, right? Is the true end goal to have a single point of failure, to funnel all rollups into one? And so now they dictate what transactions are approved, what transactions are not approved. I think there's in Ethereum, there's like OFAC compliant block, and of course, if you live in the US, and you have to make sure that everything is OFAC compliant, and essentially under one aspect of rules and regulations. But of course, like when we're dealing in crypto economies, we want to essentially have a way for people to choose different types of systems that will not prevent, let's say, their assets from being just locked because of some arbitrary reason. So we essentially want to create systems where your assets are yours and they can't be essentially halted, or like in the cases of Linea or potentially other shared sequencing models. So this aim for decentralized sequencers essentially means greater security for your assets, because your assets are your assets and not just locked, as in potentially Celsius's or BlockFi's case, where you provide them assets, but they still control access to them. And if they go bankrupt, well, sucks. So that's the philosophy that we're going from, where the ability for the network to determine what happens to the sequencers if they potentially do that MEV extraction, or the network to still continue to operate, even if like let's say a government entity says, no, you have to shut down the sequencer. I think that is what the ethos of crypto is. And, if we support systems that essentially go towards that path to decentralization, we don't want to create systems where it's back to the same, let's say, problems that started Bitcoin, essentially, in like the 2008 financial crisis, where the money's gone and you tough luck.
Fantastic answer. So wrapping up, when mainnet, and will US users be geofenced out of ZKM?
So I'm not actually clear on the launch date. So I think that is the actual like developer side. They're still working on that test net actually. So still early in terms of that. And I'm not sure about the let's say the geofencing either. So that's still more of like the operations and processes. But the idea is essentially that we have that's let's say working internally, and then now it's more of like the expansion processes part, but that's probably not where I'm best suited for that.
I appreciate the candid response. So if anybody's listening to this and they're interested in building on top of ZKM or leveraging this technology, what's the best way they can reach out to you or get in contact with the ZKM team?
Absolutely. My handle is Pavel_Sinel. And of course, zkm.io is the website. So that would probably be the easiest way. And I'm on that same handle on Telegram as well. So if you have any questions about like what we're building and what we're researching as well, definitely head on by and we're glad to answer.
Pavel, this was an awesome discussion. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us on the Smart Economy podcast. I really enjoyed the past hour, and we got to dig into a lot of really interesting and engaging concepts that I feel like are at the top of the mind for hopefully not just myself, but a lot of the folks that are in the blockchain space right now as we kind of like emerge into the next level of decentralization and enabling L1s and offering interoperability between them via an L2. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. And I look forward to hopefully catching you in person at an in-person event some point down the road.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Dylan.
Cheers. Well, what did you think of that conversation? I thought it was fascinating to delve further into how ZKM will offer yield on a native Bitcoin asset. It was also super interesting to dig into ZKM's decentralized sequencer network and the security that it offers. And I really enjoyed connecting the dots on how ZKM as an L2 will enhance Bitcoin's security model, particularly as Bitcoin subsidy decreases roughly every 4 years. To keep up to date with the Smart Economy podcast, head over to www.smarteconomypodcast.com. And if you like the guests that we've had on the show, please consider showing support for us by rating and reviewing your favorite episodes on your favorite podcasting platforms. Every review and rate really helps us get this show in front of more ears and eyes. And of course, if you're a NEO token holder, please consider voting for NEO News Today as your council representative. We've proudly been serving the NEO ecosystem since 2017, and will continue to do so by putting portions of our council rewards directly back into ecosystem growth initiatives. With all that said, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the Smart Economy podcast, and we're looking forward to catching you guys next time.